Thank you, Ciara, for making the time to be here today and for being on our podcast. And I'm very happy to have you. I've been looking forward to having you on the podcast for a long time. And recently spoken to Anna as well, and she has always good things to talk about you. And unfortunately, I couldn't meet you at the Women in Tech Summit that happened in Poland last year. But nevertheless, maybe this year we can meet. And I'm happy to meet you now. And I'll just dive straight into the questions. I'd like you to share your unique journey and life story because I know you have a very unique one. I've heard it on another podcast, I think the Beyond the Bit podcast. So yeah, your journey is very inspiring to me. I'm sure for a lot of other people as well. If you could like start with how you got into quantum, your life story, everything. Yeah.
Absolutely. And also, thank you so much for having me. I've actually been following your content for some time and I really like it. I think it's very valuable for the community. So, super happy to be here.
Thank you so
Also,
much.
huge fan of Anna. I'm her biggest fan, I think. I'm a massive fan. So, but yeah, so my journey into quantum is interesting and maybe a bit non-traditional and relatively. So I need to go back a bit. I was in university. I originally went to university in the pre-med track for biochemistry. I knew that I really loved science and I really wanted to, in some way, do something related to science that also created impact or gave back to the community. So these were two things that were important to me. I want to do science and I want to help people. And so I started onto this career path, this journey in university, and I quickly realized that I was actually very much drawn to working in research labs. So I had a scholarship my freshman year to work in a graduate research lab, specifically a chemistry lab. And I got to work on a project with a PhD student, and it was the absolute time of my life. I had a key to the lab, and I would go to work, and I would work until about 10 p.m. at night, and then I would get to go to the lab afterwards. And it was my absolute favorite time was just having myself in this lab environment where I got to work on some problem, and by working on this problem, I got to learn new things about the field that I was actively working on.
Mhm.
And so this was really, really piquing my interest. And at some point, I had a conversation with my advisor who said, I don't think you really want to do pre-med. He's like, you're taking organic chem, you're taking analytical chem, you're taking physical chem. He's like, I think you really like chemistry. And so I was like, that makes a lot of sense. So I thought that I would change my career path to chemistry, but I still had a physics course that was on my list of classes to take because it was a pre-med requirement. And so I thought I'll just go ahead and keep that because I've never taken a physics course. I'd love to learn more about it. And up until this point in my academic journey as a whole, I was very much an A student. It was a big part of my personality was that I do well in school, and I failed physics. I mean, completely failed it, not just a little bit. I really failed physics, and it completely. I was very thrown for a loop, and I was very much very sad, I guess you'd say, for a long period of time because this affected me greatly. And I didn't understand quite what the disconnect was. Why was I able to succeed in other courses and why was physics such a challenge? And so over the course of the next year after this failure, I would read more books about physics and I would watch videos about physics. And this was incredibly useful for me because I was able to understand the material in a way that connected with me. And I realized that so much of what came before in my academic career was really built on rote memorization and not so much on critical thinking or understanding how a system works. And physics really requires that you understand how a system works, and you have to really think through the problem in a different way. And so once I actually was able to figure this out and to go back and try physics again with this new mindset, I absolutely fell in love with it. And I've never loved something as much since then. I mean, of course, my children and other things like that, but I also deeply love physics. So that was really what spurred what I will then what becomes my career journey into quantum because I fell in love with quantum mechanics. I thought that there's nothing quite like the joy of understanding the natural world around you. I think there's still so much for us as a species to learn and to understand about reality, and physics really helps us do that. And I also, in this process, became very passionate about thinking, I could have gone my entire academic career and then of course my life without taking a physics course and without recognizing the value that it holds. And so then I became very passionate about wanting to share this with other people and tell other people like, hey, this is really awesome. I really want you to see the world the way that I do. So at that point in time, I actually ended up switching my major over to engineering physics. I did that for about 3 of the 4 years of a typical bachelor's, and then I had to withdraw from school so I could take care of a family member. And this was a very difficult decision because school and education has always been so important to me and really drives me on a daily basis. And at the time, the only experience I really had to lean on was the experience I had picked up in the food industry as a university student. And so I ended up going into management within the food industry. And I did that for several years. Now, while I was doing that, I always found that no matter what, I always had this deep longing to return to science in some form or another. And when I had done research within my physics degree, I had been told by a physics professor we needed to do a data analysis project. And so he told me I should learn how to do like C++ and Python. And he said these skills will actually become very, very useful if you want to work within physics. And at the time, it was more of an unpopular opinion to say so. It's, of course, very relevant now. So I had already had those kind of those beginner level development skills. And so while I was working as a store manager at Starbucks, I really wanted to get closer to my career path from before. And I figured that I would not be able to work in the capacity as a scientist without a degree, nor would I be able to work in a field that was very heavy on science. But I thought if I could work in technology, that's similar. There are similar things there. I still get to problem solve and use critical thinking skills and get close to technology, which is really great. So I thought I will use those beginner level skills and I'll build upon those. And so I started teaching myself more about development. I also did a few freelance projects for digital marketing, and I just wanted to learn more about the tech world in general. And so over time, I was able to move from the food industry to a software company. And from there, I just continued on this path of, well, I want to move over to IT support. So I learned about IT fundamentals, and then I wanted to do things more related to data analysis. And from there, I progressed to a data company as a solutions engineer. And so along this path, I became a bit more empowered with this idea that maybe I didn't need to be so tied to formal education. Maybe there was a way for me to learn using external resources that were available freely to the community, which is why, like I said, you have a lot of posts where you provide like these resources to people. And that's why it really resonates with me, because this was so important for my journey. And I ended up at this company. I was doing data analysis. I was an engineer. I was working on problems every single day. And I felt like I had reached this point in my career where I should feel happy and proud of what I had done. But I just felt like something was missing. And I could never escape the feeling that something was missing, that I wasn't really close to the goals of doing science or using science to impact people at a greater level. And so I really loved writing. And so I also was trying to figure out at this time, how can I combine my love of science, my love of writing? And I don't know why at that time it didn't make sense for me to say, oh, science communications, but it didn't click for me at the time. But those were two ideas that I was really pondering. And at some point I decided to take a step away from that role and venture out into the job market and see if there was something out there that was closer to the values that I had for myself. And it was really terrible timing. That was very terrible timing in the job market. So I actually spent about a whole year, I was like formally unemployed. But for several months, I had no idea what my next steps were. And during this time, I thought maybe I can just focus on some topics that have really piqued my interest, and I can teach myself new skills. And along the way, hopefully I'll find a job that will employ me. And so I started getting more into quantum computing. It was a topic that I had come across recently at that point, and I thought this is really interesting. It really combines my love of physics and quantum mechanics with also like technology, like emerging technology. And so I started learning more about it and I fell in love with it. And I just had this feeling of this is the field I want to work in for the rest of my life. And then so I had this moment of joy, but then I quickly realized, oh, perhaps I need a PhD. And if I need a PhD, it's going to take all this time. Like maybe it'll be 7 years before I work in the field. And this was early 2024. And I thought, okay, I can make this decision to go back to school. At this point, I have two daughters, and it would be rather difficult. And it will take roughly 7 years, I think is what I had calculated. Or I could perhaps do what I've done in other roles and teach myself skills, and maybe along the way I will find opportunity. So about a month after kind of thinking about how I could approach this, I started a newsletter called the Daily Qubit. And the idea was that I would write, which is something I love to do. And while I was writing about quantum computing, my goal was that I would slowly learn about the technology itself. And if I slowly learned about the technology, I figured over time I will walk away with some sort of knowledge about quantum computing that hopefully I can apply. And it started out as roughly 10 emails. All of them were friends and family. So shout out to friends and family that listened to me talk about quantum computing for several months before I think they probably unsubscribed at some point. But that actually, I put this out on LinkedIn and I thought, okay, maybe if there's one or two people out there that come across the newsletter, maybe they'll get value from it. And then I've done two things that I really want to do, which is do something related with science and help people along the way. And that newsletter grew more quickly than I expected it to. I think that at the time, news around quantum, when it came to news sources around quantum, it was fairly unsaturated. There, of course, was the Quantum Insider, but there weren't a lot of smaller newsletters. And so it was really good timing. It grew really quickly. And over a period of 6 months, I ended up having more more meetings with people around the world in the field of quantum than I, of course, ever had before because it never happened before, but more than I ever expected to. And I also ended up meeting Matt Swain from the Quantum Insider, who had come across the newsletter and was interested in my writing. And so they ended up offering me a job as a journalist. So 6 months into writing about quantum, I started working as a quantum journalist. And that was and remains probably one of the most important transitions I've ever made in my life to date because everything changed from there. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey. It's a very inspiring story and a great example to all the viewers listening, people who are in high school and university at any stage of the life, to stay resilient. And you never know what is at the other side of failure and what is waiting for you. So thank you for sharing your journey. I'd like to move on to the next question. So you're a journalist, you're a content director, advisory board member, founder, and a proud mother. How do you even balance all of this? How do you find the time to do all these things?
That's a great question. I've had this a few times before, and I don't know if I have a great answer. I will say that I don't think I experience such thing as work-life balance. And in the beginning, I was very much fueled by this passion of wanting to work in the industry, being shocked that I was working in the industry, like it was really a dream come true. And I just felt incredibly energized and wanted to take on every single opportunity that was presented to me. And so I said yes to everything. I said yes to absolutely everything. And I don't know if I managed my time so much as just kind of pushed through all of it. And then this past year, my career has grown more and I've traveled more than I ever have before in my life. I had never left the country before I worked in quantum, and now I've been to multiple countries, and it's been a complete whirlwind of an experience. And I will say, after this year, having said yes to so many things, and like I said, definitely, I don't think I have work-life balance. It's just about I do the things and I hope that I get enough done during the week so I can start the next week and not be completely on fire. And now I think coming to the end of this year where I've definitely experienced moments of burnout and fatigue, the thing that really keeps me going and makes me want to prioritize my schedule more this year is just immense gratitude at being in this space. Again, it really is a dream come true. And so I'm incredibly grateful to all of the experiences that quantum has offered me and all of the people I've been able to meet over the past year. And so that is what fuels me. And on the more logistical side, I'm very much a planner. I have to plan my schedule out. Unfortunately, it's very planned down to a T. So every Sunday, I usually take some time and I look at the week ahead. I look at all the things I absolutely need to complete during the week. And then, of course, I also have to add into my calendar. Like I get very granular with it, like when I'm cooking dinner, when am I reading with my oldest daughter, when am I like spending time with my youngest daughter. So I think it's a combination of just gratitude and willpower and also very intentional planning. That being said, I do feel that most of the time I am doing quantum from the time I wake up until the time I go to sleep. I'm just incredibly grateful that it's an industry that I'm truly passionate about, and I don't think I would have it any other way. I don't want to spend my time any other way. So.
That's great. And how has each of these roles shaped your perspective of the quantum ecosystem?
Oh, that's a good question. They're all very different, and so this is what I love about it because I think that quantum. There are many different perspectives on quantum technology. So one, you have more of the business perspective, which I definitely get more from my role at the Quantum Insider. We interact with a lot of companies that work within the quantum industry. We also work closely with governments, and so this is a much different perspective. It's more on logistically, how do we get quantum technology to the point where it's useful at a large scale. In terms of other roles, so for instance, my company, Universum Labs, is very focused on the education side, on the talent side. And so there is a place where, also through Girls in Quantum, where I get to interact with students and people who are looking to transition into the field but aren't sure how to do so. And this is also really interesting because the perspective from the business side, how do we derive business value from quantum, is in many ways very different from the perspective on the academic side of how do we prepare a workforce for quantum, but also what are the fundamental like scientific challenges related to the technology itself. And so I value each of these roles because they do give me very different perspectives. They do put me in front of very different audiences, and it really helps me have more of a rounded, like holistic overview of the technology and the development of the technology itself. So
That's so true. I think this same discussion I was having with Anna as well. And that's so true that when you're involved in all of these different sectors in the quantum ecosystem, you really get to understand the technology better. When you first entered the field, what was your vision for quantum computing and how has that vision evolved as you've been in the field?
Yeah. So when I first entered the field, it was very much with rose tinted glasses. I saw it much the way I think most people from the outside see quantum is this technology that's going to happen. It's going to come out of nowhere and it's going to completely change everything about the world around us. And while I do think that I do still hold on to the idea that I think quantum will fundamentally change the way that we live, I think that in many cases it will be more subtle than that. So in the beginning, it was very much like it's going to be explosive. It's going to change everything. Like the world will change in an instant. And over time, I've really started to understand like, yes, quantum will likely be used for applications that are high impact and will affect society in grander ways. I'm of course now more focused on how will quantum affect national security and discussions around national security, and how have these restrictions really shaped how we work at a globally collaborative level. It's really affected the relationships that we can have and the people that we can work with, which introduces more concerns. Like I think quantum has really so AI happened and we learned a lot from AI happening and things
Mm-hmm.
that we should do differently. And I feel that quantum has continued to really bring these certain things to light. So how do we develop technology responsibly? And I think whereas I was more focused on the technology having major impact in the beginning, I'm now more focused on how the technology impacts society, but in a different way, not just how does it solve problems for us, but how does it change the way that we collaborate? How does it change the way we think about borders, or we think about restrictions, or we think about our responsibility in developing the technology itself. So I don't want to say it's a more pessimistic view, but it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely a different view than when I entered. It's not just so focused on maybe more of the sci-fi aspect of it, but also very much on how does it ultimately affect us as a people, not just through the technology itself, but in other more societal ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. Um, my next question would be, journalism can sometimes get a bad reputation. How do you manage to thread the fine line between serving the truth and being biased?
Yeah, this is a good question. This was something that when I first started working for the Quantum Insider in the beginning, I was made to be very aware of this. Like it's very, we have a responsibility as a major news source
Mm-hmm.
to report the news in a very responsible way. So not just reporting on something because it is big and flashy and shiny, but reporting on something because the community can derive value from it. And so it's very much about understanding that we're writing not necessarily for clicks or likes or engagement, but we're writing because it provides value to the audience. So it's very important to always keep your audience in mind. And especially when it comes to quantum, I think one of the biggest issues with the technology itself at this point in time is one, we have either a complete lack of awareness in some circles, but in other circles, we have an awareness that is largely inaccurate.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a journalist, this is something that we play a part in. We play a very large role in this. And it's about always being very cognizant that the work we put out can have a detrimental effect that could negatively impact the development of the technology itself by if there's too much hype really affects, like if we look at, for instance, I think it's biotech. So biotech had a lot of hype at one point, and there was a lot of investment that was put into biotech, and then things didn't work out, and now the investment was pulled back. And so that's the thing that we really want to avoid with quantum is we don't want to put out news irresponsibly
Mm-hmm.
and then risk impacting it in a negative way to where we're not actually able to develop the technology in the way that we would like to. So it's about being very cognizant of the responsibility that's built into that.
Thank you so much. Actually, I think you're doing a great job with the Quantum Insider, and I think you guys are balancing everything really well. And my next question would be, which recent quantum news update were you most fascinated by, and why?
Yeah. Um, so in the past year, I felt like we've had quite a bit of news about roadmaps, which don't necessarily pique my interest that much.
Mm-hmm.
Something I am very excited about is where we start to see the convergence between quantum and AI, how these two
Mm-hmm.
technologies can help one another.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe like it was early last year that Quantinuum put out a news release about quantum generative AI. So they used quantum to generate a synthetic data set to be used to train AI models. And this is a place where our classical processes for this are actually under strain. And so this to me is really interesting, especially as we look at the way that training AI models is having quite a great effect on society, not always in the best ways, but also this need for new data, for constantly new data. So this is really interesting to me because I think that when we talk about quantum AI, it's important that there are a lot of misconceptions around these two technologies, that they are very much fundamentally different. And there are ways in which quantum could be used in a workflow for classical AI. And there are ways in which AI could be used, let's say, to help develop quantum algorithms. So quantum for AI and AI for quantum are two very different things. But I'm very excited to see what creative ways we come up with in the coming years to see how these two technologies complement each other.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for shedding some light on that because I think that's a very important point that you brought up. Quantum for AI and AI for quantum for sure. And with all of these, this last year was like packed with so much of quantum news. I'm happy that you picked this because this is one area that even I'm interested in. And my next question would be, in your view, what are the real bottlenecks holding quantum tech progress behind? Is it like hardware, algorithms, the research, funding, the talent pool? Like which one?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Over the past year, there have been so many conferences thanks to International Year of Quantum, which has been
Yes.
a lot of fun. There have been a lot of discussions. I've been in a lot of rooms physically with people talking about concerns around quantum. And so my first response, the first like knee-jerk reaction to this question is honestly all of them. All of them are a bottleneck right now.
Uh-huh.
Um, if I'm to attempt to isolate the core issue, I do think it would come back to awareness.
Mhm.
Again, I think that we have multiple issues with awareness. So one, we have inaccurate information on one side, and then we have complete lack of awareness on the other
Mhm.
side. So this impacts the entire ecosystem because we need in every single quantum ecosystem, if we look at this from more of a regional level, we need several things to be in place. So one, we need there to be pretty strong awareness at the government level,
Mhm.
because this is how we tap into funding, which will be essential for quantum. And the reason we need that support at that level is because quantum does not actually do well when we think about the typical venture capital process. So venture capital is really intended for things that have a quick turnaround to where we can see return on investment quite quickly. Quantum will not have a quick ROI just by its nature. It's going to take many years, and we don't know how many years, but it's going to take multiple years before we see quantum start to pay off. So that's why we really need to be able to tap into funding at the government level. We need their support, we need their awareness, we need policymakers to understand why they should be investing in quantum and how can it potentially benefit them from an economic perspective. And then we also need awareness, obviously, at the academic level. We need students who are trained with like not just in quantum, of course, but we also need electrical engineers. That's going to be incredibly important. We need people who are majoring in business to understand how to speak about quantum. And so we need awareness at that level. And then we also need awareness at more of the civil society level. We want people to understand how can quantum impact their daily lives, because it is the science itself is not it's not included in the same way that we learn about basic mathematics. We don't necessarily learn about basic physics throughout
Mhm.
all of the like throughout schools as a whole. And so there's not a large like general awareness of physics, not to mention quantum mechanics, and not to mention quantum computing and how this will impact their lives. And I think we really need to, as a society as a whole, have a better understanding of how it will affect us, because then there's buy-in. Then we can also get people excited about wanting to work in the field, because we desperately need to pull more people into the field, not just from a technical perspective, but also people who can communicate about quantum, who can sell quantum. So yeah, I think all of these are bottlenecks. I also feel very passionately that we're lagging on quantum algorithms.
Mhm.
But overall, I think that awareness is really the core issue.
That's so true. I completely agree with all your points. I'd like to now focus on how Girls in Quantum is doing a great job on spreading awareness in the quantum space for students in high school and above. So, how do you see the current landscape look like for women in quantum technology, the business sectors? How do you think women are influencing innovation leadership within these fields?
Yeah, I really love this question because I think I I can definitely make comparisons between what it was like to be a woman who studied physics at the university level,
Mhm.
which was a much different environment and led me to believe also in the jobs that I worked in the tech field more generally. I don't often or hadn't often seen women in teaching roles or in leadership roles as often as I saw men within those domains specifically. Also, there were definitely a lot of dynamics at the academic level that were not very conducive to making women feel comfortable in the field.
Mhm.
That being said, for me, my experience personally working in quantum, I have come across more women in leadership roles, more women in education related roles, more women in general than I have in any other field related to science or technology. So that to me is it's very motivating. It's very inspiring to see that there is so much influence in quantum. I will say too that the community has also felt fundamentally different. It's incredibly
Mhm.
warm and welcoming. Honestly, we need everyone that we can possibly get. And I feel like the community really reflects this. They're really happy when new people are here and are contributing in some way. And so I'm very excited for the number of women that I see in quantum and leadership roles that I see in very forward facing roles. And I hope that this is a trend we continue to see as other emerging technologies come about as well, just more. Um, more of both. Like we have both. We have very supportive men, we have very supportive women, and it's a really great dynamic specifically in quantum. So can't necessarily say that about all fields. So
Yeah, yeah. I think I would echo the same sentiment. The same thing that I've also observed with women in the leadership roles, front-facing roles, and the content space as well. Definitely agree with that. I was also having the same discussion with Anna in the previous podcast, and echoing the same sentiment. And then I went back and I tried to look at my analytics to see, in terms of followers, is there at least an equal percentage of women? But sadly, I saw that there was still 80 to 90% of male viewership on all my platforms. So that was a little disheartening because I was thinking the same thing, that since I'm seeing women in these higher level front-facing content roles, that would directly impact the like students who want to enter the field. But then it made me realize that no, I was having maybe a certain different perception to what the reality actually is. So I am hoping that that changes, and more women encourage other women, and more men, like you said rightly, they encourage women as well to, women and girls in high school, and just like Girls in Quantum is doing, more organizations do the same thing, and I hope to do the same as well. And I know you're doing the same by just posting on LinkedIn and your work through the Quantum Insider, and I hope that the reality changes as well. I just want to know what's your perspective of the race to quantum advantage, and do you think the community is focusing on the right problems right now?
ooh, yeah, so a few things here. So one, when we talk about the race to quantum advantage, I know there's also usually some question about timelines, which I'm also always very hesitant to answer, but always very excited to hear what other people in quantum say. And I feel like we're still definitely stuck saying 5 to 10 years,
Hmm.
which has been said since I've started in the industry, and I know has been said for many years before that. So that hasn't changed. We all think that we're still 5 to 10 years away. That being said, I feel that we are, especially over the past 2 years, we've gained a lot more clarity into what are the unique challenges for each modality. So each modality definitely has different advantages, but there's also each of them also have engineering challenges that are not easily overcome, and I feel like they're fairly on equal footing if we look at those specifically. That being said, I think that we are slowly clearing the path to resolve these challenges. However, in order to do this at the scale that we need to, which is probably 5 to 10 years, again, it comes back to those previous questions around we need long-term funding, we need
Hmm.
awareness, we need to build a workforce. So all of these pieces are very important. In terms of are we focusing on the right things? Yes and no. So I do think there is quite heavy focus on driving the hardware forward, and this is great. We also do tend to have a lot of discussions at events about the need for more talent, the need to build the workforce, the need for education that reaches people in a variety of ways. I think something that was also echoed quite strongly throughout the community this year is that we specifically spend a lot of time talking about these things. We're all very clear on what the challenges are, but what we would all like to see is how do we actually begin to resolve those challenges? And I think that
Yes.
there are some really incredible people in the community who are really pushing forward a lot of different unique platforms to reach people in creative ways. And so we're starting to see traction there. And then to kind of bring back what I started to say earlier, I do think that we have not put as much emphasis on quantum software, on algorithms as much as we should.
Hmm.
These are largely looked at as a downstream problem. Like first we have the hardware and then we'll focus on the software.
Hmm.
But that's not actually very I don't think that's incredibly strategic. I
Hmm.
think that because if we were to, let's say we wake up tomorrow, there's a fault tolerant quantum computer, we don't have the best algorithms we need in order to actually use it to its full potential. And so I think it's very important that we continue our focus on resolving the engineering challenges. But while we're kind of in this time of like waiting for a fault tolerant quantum computer, it's the perfect time to really focus on the software, to focus on the algorithms. And in order to do that, we need to approach it. It's a different approach. You need a different skill set. You need
Hmm.
a different sorts of education. You need different ways to reach people, creative ways to reach people. And so that's something I would like to see in the coming year. I know that there's a project that I'm working on with a group of other people that is actually very concentrated on this part of the ecosystem as a whole. But that's something I really hope to see a concentration on in this coming year is one, us doing things that we talk about, and then two, focusing on the software.
Completely agree with you again on this point. Definitely a balance on the hardware as well as the algorithm side is definitely needed, and spreading awareness for sure in the quantum space. So completely agree with all of your points. My next question would be, how do you think geopolitics will shape the future of quantum technologies and national securities of various countries, since quantum technology is such a sensitive topic at this point in time, and we're at this crucial stage. So what is your opinion?
This is yeah. I I definitely I spend a lot of time thinking about this, and I think a lot of people in quantum do as well.
Mhm.
Again, what I think quantum needs more than anything is collaboration at a global scale. And at the same time, what it struggles with is collaboration at a global scale because of the concerns around national security. And so
Mhm.
it's definitely a difficult problem. I know right now there are still lots of ways to work with people from different places in the world, but we do see that these are coming under more scrutiny as time goes on. And I expect that it will only continue along that trajectory. I don't necessarily expect it to go in the other direction. And once there is a fault tolerant quantum computer online, I think that we will continue to see more restrictions and more borders put into place, which is definitely a concern. And I think it's something we should have more conversation around now rather than later. Because again, quantum needs everyone. It will affect all of us on a global scale, and it's important that everybody has some sort of voice in that conversation. And then there's also this other side of it, a bit less around the well, I guess still around collaboration. Out of the countries that I visited last year, there were a couple that were very focused on creating a fully sovereign ecosystem. So one where all of the parts were manufactured locally, and the computers were built from the ground up locally, and the talent was sourced locally. And this, of course, sounds good in theory. However, I think it's also limiting because
Mhm.
if we're focused, because different regions have different strengths, and I think it makes more sense, and we will see more development, more traction in the development of the technology itself if regions are focused on their strengths and how it relates back to quantum. So, for instance, I know we did the Quantum World Tour this past year with the ITU, and the first country that we highlighted was Malta, and this was really interesting. So Malta is a very small country, but because they're very small, they were able to pilot one of the first cross-country QKD links because they're very small.
Mhm.
And another thing that worked really well for Malta is that they have really great awareness because the same person who's teaching at the university is also involved in the government and also has a quantum startup because it's a smaller community. They can communicate quite quickly and things don't necessarily get bogged down because there are lots of different people you need to go through. Everyone can be in the same room, which is very useful. And they focused on what was meaningful for them, which they used quantum in some way for detection of seismic detection. And this is really relevant to them and where they're located geographically. And so they were able to have success in building a quantum ecosystem because they weren't focused on how do we do everything like quantum computing, quantum sensing, quantum networks, how do we do everything and do it domestically, but they were rather focused on how quantum was uniquely suited to their region. And so
Mhm.
I think this is another thing we also need to keep in mind when we talk about how do like at a regional level, how does quantum affect us in that way. So focusing on strengths on one hand, and then when we think about the geopolitical side, I think we need to have more conversations about how this is going to affect us and how do we keep the lines of communication open.
Definitely, definitely agree again. Collaboration between countries is definitely very important, especially for quantum technologies at this time, particularly, and for the future as well. And again, I would echo the same sentiment as you as well. Our next question would be, what advice would you give someone who wants to, just like you, follow a path in STEM journalism?
Oh, start writing publicly in any form you possibly can now.
Mhm.
And don't focus too much on wanting to appear perfect or to create this perfect image of yourself. These are two things that I struggled with. So I have loved writing and have actively written for myself for about, I think it's maybe 8 or 9 years now.
Mhm.
I started having this daily ritual. I would wake up and I would write 3 pages. I've always been a really big reader. I love writing. It's very core to who I am as a person. And the idea of ever putting my writing out into the public space was absolutely terrifying. And I never thought that would be something that I did. And so when I started the newsletter, it was this really big thing that I had to overcome to put myself in a very vulnerable position, especially speaking about quantum technology, of which at the time I was very new, like fresh to the industry, and knew that I would make mistakes along the way. And I was, the quantum community, they are very vocal. If anything is ever inaccurate or in any way, shape, or form, or if they don't like it, they're very, very vocal. So I had to really put myself in this vulnerable position to put my writing and make it public. But I have never had a more positive and just life-changing experience than writing publicly. And honestly, people are really quite nice. And the community was really welcoming. And I met so many people I never could have dreamed of meeting solely because I wrote about things on LinkedIn. And so this is a hill I will die on. I tell my younger brother this, please like post things on LinkedIn, talk on LinkedIn about something that you're passionate about. Don't force it. It should be something you're passionate about. And never get too worried about making something perfect or appearing perfect. Because I've also found that when I am less filtered and when I am just showing up as Cierra as I would in daily life, I find that the writing performs better, and I connect with people more ably. So yes, if anyone is interested in science journalism, just start writing publicly, and you will find opportunity. It will come to you.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes, definitely. Great advice again. I've experienced the same as well, and definitely agree on that. And having briefly served as an editor-in-chief for a budding STEM organization myself, I'm curious about your process. How do you constantly stay updated with the latest trends, updates in such a dynamic field like quantum computing, and which requires so much technical review to be able to accurately report news and avoid false claims? How do you do all this, and how does the Quantum Insider as well manage to constantly churn out dependable news?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I first started and I was writing the newsletter, which was daily, and I was also working at the Quantum Insider, that it was really easy to keep up with the news because I needed to keep up with it as part of the role. And in order to do that, I would wake up incredibly early in the morning and I would start automatically scanning LinkedIn for news because people post a lot of news on LinkedIn before it actually gets picked up by the search engine. So that's a great way to keep up with news. And then
Yes.
I would also search the search engines, of course. And then at the Quantum Insider, we have a proprietary data platform, and one of the features of our platform is we actually we scrape all the news related to quantum, and so that's just something we have behind the scenes that's incredibly useful in keeping up and being able to find dependable news. So that's one side of it, is knowing which sources you should be looking at. I highly recommend following people who talk about quantum or work in quantum on LinkedIn. Great source of news. Also important to follow a variety of perspectives. So that way, when a breaking story is leaked, you can actually get a very well-rounded idea of how breaking it actually is, whether or not it's worth the hype that is typically put out by the larger news outlets. Um, and then the other side of this as a journalist, in order to ensure that I'm picking up on the news that is dependable and relevant for the community, is one, being very engaged with the community itself. So I've spent a lot of time in networking calls and at conferences speaking to people who work in quantum. And I naturally start to understand through this process, naturally start to understand what is relevant, what is most important, what should we be focused on. And then the last part is really self-education. So when I first started in quantum, I had this idea that before I actually, like when I first started writing the newsletter, I had the idea that before I could work in quantum, I needed to be an expert in all things quantum technology related, not just quantum computing. And then very quickly, I realized that that is not something that happens very quickly. That will actually take many years, and I still have many years ahead of me. But it's okay to there should always be some process of learning. So
Mhm.
I'm always looking to read to understand something at a deeper level. And I'm also very patient with myself in understanding that I will gradually understand more and more concepts over time. So that was a very disorganized answer, but all this to say, choose your sources wisely, immerse yourself in the content you wish to learn more about and you wish to write about in a responsible nature, and also be very graceful with yourself because these things take time and it will come to you over time.
Great advice again, and all the efforts that you've been taking is definitely reflecting in your work. So definitely great job over there. And my next question would be: since quantum is a very complex field to understand for someone without a STEM background, and journalism requires you to cater to a general audience most of the time, how do you strike the balance between technical rigor and accessible reporting?
Yeah, this is by far the most difficult part of writing about quantum, is being able to write for the audience. I have found that in most instances where I'm writing about quantum, I have to write for both the technical audience and the general audience. It is very rarely one or the other, which makes it really difficult.
Yeah.
And so I have a process in my writing where I really like to make the intro more relatable.
Mhm.
I want to make whatever I'm speaking about more visceral and immersive for you as the reader, because I understand that as humans, we're very much visual, interactive learners. We want to be able to relate what we're reading back to our everyday lives. And that can be
Mhm.
very difficult with quantum because it's not necessarily something that you visibly see on an everyday basis. And so the first thing I try to do is to make this more of an immersive visual experience for the more general reader so that they understand how they can relate it back to their everyday lives, and also why does it matter? What is the impact? I think it's very, very important to always think about how is this specific thing that I'm writing about important for my audience, what impact can it have for them. And then of course there's always at least some part in the writing that gets a bit more technical for those who are looking for more of the technical review of the work itself. But it's definitely, I don't know if I've perfected it or if I know anyone who's perfected it. It's not easy to communicate about quantum, but I think that as a whole, us who communicate in this space, if we focus on how to relate it back to everyday lives and what is the impact or potential impact, if we always have those two things, those are the most important pieces in any form of communication, in my opinion.
As a reader and viewer of your work, I'm sure that you're doing it really well. You're balancing that line definitely really well. My next question would be, in an age of AI, where misinformation, hype, censorship, and synthetic content are becoming more prevalent. How do you see future of journalism and information consumption evolving, particularly for emerging technologies like quantum?
Yeah, I worry about it. I would say that's my first reaction. I think us as a society need to be very, very intentional about what we consume, because we cannot control the level, the amount of hype that's out there, other than not contributing to it, of course. We cannot control the amount of misinformation that's out there. This has been an issue, I think, in every part of the information age, and now even more so. But what we can control is what we consume, and to be very, very careful about the sources that we follow. And if we read something, it's important to never ever just get your news from one source, but to really compare it across multiple different perspectives from multiple different people and also from trusted voices. I really, really like to follow people, not so much just entities. I love to follow people, especially people that I have met in person and that I know mean what they say and are not just generating something for the sake of generating something. And so, yeah, I don't know, that's really the best answer I think I could give now. Is this is definitely a situation of there are things we can control and there are things we cannot control, and we need to focus on what we can control, and that's on responsible consumption of information. And then for those of us who are content creators, is being very, very, again, understanding that we have a responsibility to put out information that we can use AI to generate, but we need to be sure that we're fact checking and following
Mhm.
up and doing our due diligence,
Mhm.
um, to ensure that we're putting out information that is true and factual and provides actual value.
Great advice again. Completely agree on that. Yes, for sure, definitely. Um, my last question, if you want to, what message would you want to leave with viewers, any budding young researchers, journalists who want to make an impact in the quantum space?
Oh yeah. How would I formulate this? There is, I think, something that I didn't learn until my 30s, which is a bit ridiculous because it's very simple, is that you have all the power within you to go out and just do things. And you don't need to wait on approval from anyone. You don't need to wait on formal certifications. Of course, we need to do things responsibly, but you don't really need any external permission to go out and do things that you're passionate about, to research and solve problems that you're passionate about. And so, my advice to anyone who is ever interested in the quantum space, like, just go out and do whatever you wish to do, whatever you feel pulled to do, whether it's writing about quantum, researching quantum, whatever it is about quantum, just go out and do it, because we need as many people as possible. And also, I think we as a people, we can really put ourselves into boxes quite quickly. And it's important to recognize that we are in complete control of ourselves, and not always our environment, but ourselves. And we can make things happen if we put in the time and the effort. So
Thank you. That's a beautiful message and a great note to end this podcast on. Thank you for taking the time to be on our podcast today. And it was lovely meeting you for the first time and speaking to you and getting to know your perspectives on the quantum ecosystem. And thank you for being here today. And hope to meet you soon. And we'll have another podcast as well, surely in the future, in the near future. Thank you.
sounds great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.